Well, I'm just going to leave this running. I don't know. If it runs for hours, then it runs for hours. I don't know. I could show you this. Let's look at this. Copyright material, probably. So, no, this is going round. There's absolutely nothing wrong with my internet. I don't know why it's doing that. So you can see all these things. Let's have a look at ex-Korean. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with my internet. But what's happening is that NordVPN is being hacked, or my computer is being hacked and preventing NordVPN from working. So I can't change the settings because I can't actually get access to it. Now, I updated it a few days ago, so I've got the latest version. I think I have anyway. So you can just, I don't know, maybe I'll find some music or something to play whilst this is just going on. How about, I'm going to see if I can get something in. Going to go into Chrome in incognito. So here I am in Chrome. Let's see if I can find some entertainment. What have we got here? BBC Sounds. There you go, BBC Sounds. NordVPN continues to go now. So sign in. So I'm signing into the BBC. Let's do Radio 4. Right, here we go.
Quite like him. There's somebody who's been able to invent not just an entire world, but an integrated world, a world of language, of history, of mythology, and that is woven together with a literary skill that draws the reader in the most compelling way.
What's the kind of the real stuff that's underlying the fiction?
I think you've got to remember that Tolkien never earned his living as
This is about
the writer of
Tolkien.
The Lord of the Rings. And what he was really serious about was medieval literature and language. He was a teacher for all of his life. And it's that deep knowledge of medieval languages and literature and history that underpin his imagined worlds, the world of Middle-earth. And I think that's another aspect that is unique, I think, to Tolkien, in that sense of the scholarship being right at the heart of a literature that's won millions of readers, millions of watchers of the films and the Amazon TV adaptation.
Down from the door.
How do you feel, though, about the fact that the majority of people will experience his work through those films and those TV shows rather than the actual texts
I don't know why I did
themselves?
that.
The one
Didn't
thing
do
that
me
we
any good.
noticed, we did a major Tolkien exhibition in Oxford in 2018, which then travelled to New York, and we
So there's nothing
found
wrong with my
huge
internet,
numbers of
otherwise
very
it
young
would be
people,
BBC
people
Sounds
who'd
would just be
only encountered Tolkien through the films, coming to
And it's
understand
been
his life and work
4
through
minutes
the
38.
exhibition, and
I've
then
been
coming back to the
trying
literature.
to
And
log
that's the
into
most important
NordVPN.
thing, because the
And,
wonderful thing, the thing that I
I can't change
encountered
the
as a
settings
teenager
because
reading Tolkien
I can't
was
get
that
in to
it
change the
triggered the
settings.
imagination in an extraordinary way. And it's like a
I'm
drug.
just being hacked
Once
out.
you read Tolkien, your kind of synapses
So
trigger like
I'm
no
going to
other
go off and
writer,
do
I
something
think.
else.
we're marking the anniversary of Tolkien's death, but when he was alive, how much did he talk about his work and what he was doing and what he was trying to achieve and how he felt about how it was received?
He talks about it to his group of friends in Oxford. That's actually where he first aired his writings, sometimes in draft, through sessions in various public houses in Oxford. He gave relatively few interviews in his lifetime. I think he was a little embarrassed after the great success of The Lord of the Rings in the 1950s. He also recorded his own readings of some of his books, which are extraordinary to listen to him reading them.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, in the darkness bind them. There's only 2 lines of a verse long known in open law. 3 rings for the elven.
Entry-level analysis of Lord of the Rings is that it's about the First World War. Can you use it to analyse what's happening in Ukraine, say, a very modern conflict?
I don't think you can use it as a tool to analyse what's happening in Ukraine. That would be completely anachronistic. But you can draw the analogy of, I mean, as indeed Ukrainians do. They term Russian troops the orcs. And so the moral and ethical issues that are explored by Tolkien and that emerge from the stories and that are embedded in the mythology and in the invented history are eternal.
And that's all from this edition of PM. Thank you very much for having me. Today's producers were Olivia Sopel and Emily Lewis, and the editor was Sam Mason-Jones. Bye.
Now here on Radio 4, it's time for All Consuming. This week, Charlotte Stavru and Amit Katwala are rolling the dice as they take a deep dive into the ever-evolving world of board games and learn why in Monopoly, getting stuck in jail isn't always a bad thing.
You've had some terrible luck today. There's been a murder in the library, and your friends suspect you. But you know who the murderer is, thanks to one big clue.
Next, it's World War again. You look out across the battlefield. Dozens of your soldiers have been captured by the enemy, but it's time to take one more risk.
You thought you knew all the answers, but you forgot something trivial. And now you're all the way back to square one.
Today is your least favourite day of the month. It's rent day. Your landlord is standing outside, twirling his moustache and demanding £400. But life could be a lot worse. At least he can't put you in jail. Yep, you might have guessed it. We're on a roll in this episode of All Consuming, as we explore the world of board games. So let's see how this one plays out.
It was very, very fun, very cozy to be safe with my friends playing the board games.
These games would never be successful today.
Prison is an enemy at the beginning and a friend at the end of the game.
This is All Consuming, with me, Charlotte Stavru.
And me, Amit Katwala. I'm a science journalist and author, and Charlotte is an entrepreneur and marketer.
And in this series, we explore our culture of consumption through products that have changed the world.
So, Charlotte, are you a big board game fan? Do you have any board games at home?
I am. I love backgammon. We play a bit of chess at home. Also, Articulate is a very big game in my friendship circle that causes a lot of drama. And when I was younger, we used to play a lot of Monopoly, but that got banned very quickly because me and my brother used to get a bit too aggressive.
Right, people flipping the board over and things like that. Or...
Yeah. You cheated! I wasn't cheating! He always cheated.
Yeah. My sister's like a Monopoly savant. Like, she always wins. It's really weird. So we stopped playing that a long time ago because I just got, again,
she was probably cheating.
Maybe
when
she was cheating.
When they always win, I'm always like, was she the banker?
Yeah, you're right. Maybe the scales have been lifted from my eyes. She was cheating the whole time.
So what about you? Into board games?
Yeah, we have a few at home. Nothing like too... Most of the normal ones, like we play Trivial Pursuit a lot with the family. We've started playing Azul recently, me and my wife, which is a really good one. It's like tile placing game. It's really pretty to look at. And we play a lot of backgammon as well because my wife's Persian, so it's obviously a big thing in their culture as well to play backgammon. I remember the first time I beat her uncle at backgammon was like the moment I kind of got accepted into the family. It was like,
oh my God, it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say we're board game fans. But even between the two of us, we've barely scratched the surface. According to the online database Board Game Geek, there are over 140,000 board games in the world, and around 3,500 are made every year. So we've got a lot to catch up on.
To get a head start on all of these games, I went to a place where board games are the main attraction. So we are at Orcs Nest, which is a board game shop in Covent Garden in central London. It's a really, really small space and it's absolutely piled full of hundreds, maybe thousands of different board games. There's all sorts of genres and bright colours and amazing illustrations. I can see Marvel board games, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. The shop is kind of small, it's got low ceilings, it's kind of tucked into a little alleyway and it's really busy, so you have to kind of squeeze around to get past people. I asked Casper, who works at Orcs Nest, which games were the most popular.
Our most popular games are definitely Splendor and Catan. They kind of rule the board game market wholeheartedly. Some of the more recent but up-and-coming games, we've got Ticket to Ride, which is an automatic classic, Pandemic, which is fantastic.
I think a lot of people listening will think of board games and they'll think of, the game of Monopoly at Christmas or like a dusty copy of Cluedo. And I guess what I've been really struck by being here is the variety and the huge breadth of stuff. Has the market always been like this? How has the market changed since the shop opened?
I think there are more things available to cater to more sorts of people, but I think with different innovations in the board game is kind of the area. Well, the thing I hear a lot is that people will say, oh, my family gets so vicious at Catan, I love Catan, I'm so competitive at it. Or Monopoly is brutal and it's heartbreaking. And I think it really shows that it is what you make it to be. You can play Monopoly as a very chill, just kind of sitting back while grandma is in the corner and she's not really paying attention. Or you can make it the most hardcore Wall Street adventure. And there are games that will actively invite you to do that.
I also heard from some of the customers at Orcs Nest to find out what makes board games so special.
So I grew up playing them with the family. It was one thing that we could agree on. There was my parents and my two other siblings and myself playing them, and it was one way to help us in good sportsmanship. Big family rule was whoever won got to pack up the game.
I remember once it was like night and there was a thunderstorm and the whole city got without power. So I was in my friend's house and we couldn't go home because it was not safe to go to get a taxi and an Uber. So we spent the whole night until the sun came out playing board games. It was amazing. It was one of the best nights ever.
So how's the rules work in your family games? Do you follow them? Are you strict with them, or do you have your own?
I think we play by the rules, but actually if you were to check the actual rules that come with the box, we're probably not doing it right. Articulate's got a weird thing in the middle where you're supposed to spin it, and I have no idea what that's for, so we just don't use it.
I recently went to a friend's house for a birthday and we played Articulate, and we had arguments over what the spinner was for. But there was like 3 different camps of what it was for, and we had to get the rules out. I was like, oh, I've been playing this game very differently.
What is it for? I still don't know.
I'm not going to tell you. I don't have a clue, but whatever it is for, it's not how I've been using it.
With the sheer number of board games currently available and a steady stream of new games released every year, it's no surprise that the global board game industry is estimated to be worth between £8.5 billion and £10.5 billion a year.
But what exactly is a board game? Thanks to the games we've played in the past, we may feel we instinctively know what a board game is, but there are a few nuances.
Despite boards having an important role in RPG or role-player games like Dungeons & Dragons, these aren't strictly classified as board games as they don't have a defined ending.
Card games like Uno or Solitaire aren't strictly board games either. While cards play an important role in some board games, at its core, a board game sees pieces moved in a particular way around the board, either through luck or strategy. And these games have been around for a long, long time.
The first board game dates back 5,500 years to the time of the ancient Egyptians.
The first ever documented board game is Senet, because that's around 3,500 BC to 3,100 BC.
We spoke to Dan Jollin, the co-creator of a board game magazine, which is also, not by coincidence, named Senet.
So Senet would typically have been played by, well, very rich people in Egypt, really. We believe that it would have been like a status symbol to some degree to have a beautiful box board of a game like Senet. You've got pharaohs. So, for example, when they were interred and mummified and all that business, they had all their possessions put in there with them. That's why we know about the game Senet.
A remarkably well-preserved version of Senet sits in the British Museum. I brought along a photo of one that's been sitting in display there since 1965.
So it's a white box. I think it's made of ivory. It's got a grid of squares along the top. So I think it's like, 10 squares long and then 3 squares wide. And there's a little drawer in with the pieces. And the pieces look like chess pawns. So they're kind of like little carved pieces. They're 2 different shades of blue. And then there's also some pegs and other little bits. It's not entirely clear to me what the rules are. And I think there's hieroglyphics engraved on the side as well. It looks very well made. It looks like it's very beautifully made and very intricate, considering it was made 5,500 years ago. Despite intact copies of Senet being unearthed from the tombs of ancient Egyptian royalty, no written records of how the game was played have ever been found. So historians have had to piece together and guess the rules.
On this board, they would have had, like pawns, they would have had pieces that they put on there. One person's trying to get all their pieces off one side, the other person's trying to get all their pieces off the other side. And then they would be throwing sticks or bones instead of rolling dice to determine how many places they would go. With some variations, there might even be a kind of an element of a river that needs to be crossed, and once you've crossed the river, you're in safe territory, things like that. But typically it's quite abstracted. And there's a connection to the afterlife in the game. Like, you're either traveling through the afterlife, the idea being you're kind of trying to get through it so then your soul can be released again, or you're trying to get to the afterlife in terms of, crossing the river into paradise.
And this game had a big impact on ancient Egyptian culture.
It was very important to the Egyptians, to the degree that people think that there was even almost like a ritualistic element to it. They believe that some people playing it believe that by playing the game they could actually get insights into their own afterlife, about the future of their soul even. It goes to show that board games actually were very culturally significant from a very early stage.
The ancient Egyptians were prolific inventors of board games. In addition to Senet, there was Mehen, made up of a carved board representing a snake with game pieces depicting lions. There was also a game called Hounds and Jackals, which involved a board made up of 58 holes with gaming pieces, 10 small sticks with either a dog or a jackal head. Hounds and Jackals spread via trade routes from Egypt throughout the Mediterranean, and remains of the game have even been found in modern-day Azerbaijan.
Another ancient board game which found universal appeal is Mancala. Created in East Africa, its exact origin date is unknown, but it's thought to have been around for almost as long as Senet.
The word Mancala comes from the Arabic word nakala, which means to move. What each player is doing is they have a bunch of pits with a number of seeds in them, and you would, on your turn, pick up all of the seeds from one of those pits and then seed them one by one around the board, and the aim would be to capture your opponents. It travelled into Europe, especially Eastern Europe, certainly Greece. They found evidence of it being played. Eventually, over time, it ended up travelling to the Americas with the slave trade, unfortunately. So it ended up in the Americas and was very popular in American slave communities.
But the aim of Mancala may have gone beyond just winning.
There are theories that, again, to bring a ritualistic element, there might have been a certain coming-of-age element to it, like, in certain communities, once you started playing Mancala or a Mancala-type game, that you were being welcomed into the realm of adulthood, and, that was an important thing.
That's kind of like you beating your wife's uncle at backgammon, kind of got you accepted into her family.
Yeah, there's definitely a real cultural element to it. I just need to know what game I need to win to be welcomed into the realm of adulthood. Of course, we can't talk about the history of board games without mentioning the most popular board game in the world. That's right, chess. Dating back to India in the 6th century, where it was originally called Chaturanga, the game spread to Persia, then the Arab world, then to the Far East, and eventually to Europe in the late medieval period.
There are now an estimated 800 million chess players in the world. And thanks to the hit Netflix drama The Queen's Gambit, which followed the fictional story of a female grandmaster, there was a worldwide shortage of chessboards in 2021. But when did the mass production of board games begin?
If you want to think about board games in the more modern sense, as we think of them now, you're looking at probably something like the game of the goose, which is late 16th century, maybe a little bit earlier, in terms of being a commercially produced game. So, you're now in sort of the era of being able to, mass produce to a degree and print things and have it come with like thematic illustration on it. You're starting to look more like the kind of board games people are familiar with now. That brought in the genre of roll and move, which is just quite simply rolling dice, moving pieces and see where they end up, which is not in any way, in my opinion, involving or strategic or fun, but easier for children.
So Game of the Goose, which Dan was just describing there, basically looks like a sort of proto-Snakes and Ladders, in that you just basically roll the dice and you move around this big spiral to try and get to the centre, which is where the goose is. You can see on there, like it's sort of got all these little squares. So it really does look like kind of like a kid's game, as he's describing, which is super interesting.
So, Amit, you mentioned how it's a bit like Snakes and Ladders, but do you know the history of Snakes and Ladders?
No, I don't.
So it has roots in ancient India, and it was used for teaching kids the understanding of good and evil, or good and bad. So if you think about the snakes are taking you down, the ladders are taking you up, it's kind of signifying ladders taking you up, propelling you for the good deeds that you're doing, and then the snakes representing the evil that we do that can drag us down if we're not careful. It's got quite a big meaning.
Yeah, real life lessons there.
Yeah, which I thought was quite interesting, because I've played it many times and I did not know that. That's where it came from.
Maybe I just got the lesson that snakes are scary and you should run away from them.
Absolutely.
But maybe you're not picking up on the deeper message there. A large proportion of ancient board games relied on luck, so usually through rolling dice, just like Snakes and Ladders. But most modern board games now include a heavy dose of strategy. And the master of the modern strategy game is Rainer Knizia. Rainer has sold millions of copies of his board games worldwide and invented over 800 games, including El Dorado, Samurai, and Lost Cities. We visited his office in Munich, where he develops new ideas, to find out how he earned the title King of the Board Games.
Well, we have a big library where one edition of each of the games ever published from us is kept. We have about 800 different games, but of course we have more than 2,000 different editions, so 2,000 different boxes, because there are different language editions, there are later editions which have been updated. You more see lots of prototypes lying around, that is games which have not been published yet.
Rainer started his career in academia, completing a PhD in mathematics, but he couldn't shake the board game bug and published his first game, Gold Rush, in 1990. Just 7 years later, he quit his job at an international bank to develop board games full-time.
The games which I published in the 90s, or had published in the 90s, were quite different to the games which are relevant today. You need to stand out in whatever way from the crowd of maybe 1,000 novelties every year, and people are very impatient. They don't want to read rules, and when you look at our classic games like Go or chess, they have a very slow start. I mean, you can stare at the board for 5 minutes and nothing happens. These games would never be successful today. They are successful because they are classic traditional games and they have reached the critical mass that lots of people know it, and that's the secret for success of games. If you reach enough people, then they will carry on from generation to generation.
Board game developers have constantly had to adapt. New ideas are celebrated in this market, but coming up with over 800 new ideas makes him unique in the industry. So how does Rainer do it?
I've successfully
to
logged
get a
in.
playable prototype on the table,
So
the game needs to
continue.
be designed first, and that happens in my head. And there, my experience with games helps me, but I also think my education in the scientific world helps me, because it's really closing my eyes and putting myself into the play situation. And I have a player to the left, and I have a player to the right, and I have the materials in front of me, and I know what kind of emotions I want to communicate and transfer with the game, and I'm just taking my turn. And then I'm asking myself, so why is this exciting? And why is it exciting when somebody else takes a turn? And why is this novel? And what can I do to put some new elements into the game?
One of Reiner's most popular games is called The Lord of the Rings and is based on the Tolkien novels. More than 1 million copies of it have been sold worldwide, and it's what's called a cooperative game. Like the characters in the novels, players have to work together to complete a task, and you either win as a collective or you all lose. And this ethos of togetherness is something that Reiner admires and fosters.
These games, I think, for me and for many, many billions of people over the world, are just a wonderful way to spend your pastime with other people. We are all the same in this context. We can enjoy equally the challenge of the game. We can either play against each other, and now also quite popular, we can also play together in a cooperative game and go through the challenges the game gives us. And that's a wonderful experience. It's an interactive experience. So they bring people together, and I think they make the world a better place.
While some people are happy just taking part in a board game, others strive to win, no matter what. So, what does it take to become a board game champion?
Hello, I'm Nicola Falcone. I'm Italian from Venice. I am 30 years old. I am a stand-up comedian. And from 2015, I am the Monopoly World Champion.
Niccolo won at the most recent Monopoly World Championship in Macau, China, where he came away with $20,580, the amount which comes with a standard American Monopoly set.
I started playing Monopoly when I was a kid, playing with my dad and my brother, my older brother. He's 4 years older than me, and every Saturday or Sunday during the winter we used to play during the afternoon, and they were super hard with me, and my brother and father start to yell at me, buttare giù, which means destroy your house. They start crying. This is how my Monopoly experience begins.
Oh my goodness, it sounds very harsh.
Yeah, this is the way to become
a champion.
Yeah.
So what is it about Monopoly that you like so much?
The money, more or less. The correct answer is the money. Is the moment when the money of the other players starting being mine.
So what are Niccolo's tips for winning?
Remember that the prison is an enemy at the beginning of the game and a friend at the end of the game. So if you are in prison at the beginning of the game, pay the $50 and go out. If you are at the end, stay there and wait for the free turns.
So you've been playing the game for most of your life. You've been a champion for a good few years now. What does Monopoly mean to you?
More or less is the way that people present me when they introduce me to other person. He's Nicola, he is the Monopoly World Champion. Really? This is Monopoly for me now.
Oh, that's amazing. It's just your identity.
Yeah, more or less, yes. I think that somebody says something about Monopoly will be written on my grave. I'm pretty sure about this.
I love that. Such a great guy, fascinating character, world Monopoly champion.
He was so nice and so funny. Such interesting insights to his life.
It sounded like his beginnings in the game were quite traumatic, though, with his dad and his brother sort of, taking all his money while he cried.
I felt like it built a champion.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. He says that he kind of enjoys the capitalist life lessons of Monopoly, getting all the money and things like that. But actually, funnily enough, that's not what Monopoly's designed to do, even though that's the message people take from it. It's supposed to be a warning about that kind of exploitative behaviour. It was called the Landlord's Game when it was first made in 1904, and it was originally made as a critique of landlords and a critique of monopolies.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's so interesting. We've been playing it wrong all this time.
Well, now that you've got Nicolo's tips, do you think you'll be doing a bit better and, not fighting with your brother next time you play it?
Definitely. I'm hoping my brother and my husband both don't listen to this episode because I'm going to take the tips very seriously and I'm going to put them into practice probably over Christmas.
It's been really interesting to learn about how board games have changed over the years, obviously going from games that were based on luck and maybe part of, rituals about moving into adulthood to things that are more strategic but still have that sort of integral place in society of, you play them as a kid, they're still based on luck, and then as you get older you play more strategic games, you start playing with the adults, and they're still an important part of lots of people's lives.
Yeah, I'd never thought about board games in that way, and they're essentially just like the book of life, but just in a game form, and obviously that's a great way to teach kids anything if you make it into a game. So now I've done this episode with you, I'm like, oh wow, there's so much I can uncover.
And that's it for this episode of All Consuming.
Thanks for joining us. Next week, we're refusing to fade away while unravelling the world of denim.
And don't forget, you can listen to every episode of this season on BBC Sounds.
All Consuming was presented by Charlotte Stavru and Amit Katwala. The producer was Carrie Morrison, and it was a Whistledown production for BBC Radio 4. On 92 to 95 FM, 198 long wave, on digital radio and BBC Sounds, it's time now for the shipping forecast, issued by the Met Office on behalf of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency at 1725 on Saturday the 2nd of September. There are warnings of gales in southeast Iceland. The general synopsis at midday. Low Portugal 1010, expected Trafalgar 1007 by midday tomorrow. High Dogger 1024, expected Humber 1029 by same time. The area forecasts for the next 24 hours. West Viking, southwesterly 4 to 6, rain, good occasionally poor. East Viking, north at Sierra, variable 2 to 4, becoming southerly or southwesterly 4 to 6, occasionally 7 in north at Sierra. Rain, good occasionally poor. South at Sierra, northwesterly backing southwesterly 4 to 6, showers, moderate or good. 40s, west or southwest 3 to 5, occasionally 6 later. Fair, good. Cromarty 4th, south or southwest 4 to 6, fair, good. Tyne Dogger, variable 2 to 4, becoming southwest 3 to 5, fair, good. Northeast Fisher, northwesterly 5 to 7, backing westerly or southwesterly 4 or 5, fair, good. Southwest Fisher, German Bight, northwesterly backing westerly or southwesterly 3 to 5, fair, good. Humber Thames, variable 2 to 4, fair, good. Dover White, east or northeast 2 to 4, occasionally 5 later, fair, good, occasionally moderate. Portland, Plymouth, northeast Biscay, easterly or northeasterly 3 to 5, fog patches later, moderate or good, occasionally very poor later. Southwest Biscay, Fitzroy, easterly or northeasterly 4 to 6, occasionally 7 in South Fitzroy, thundery showers at first in south, good, occasionally moderate. Southeast Seoul, northeasterly 3 to 5, mainly fair, good, occasionally poor. Northwest Seoul, Lundy Fastnet, variable 2 to 4, mainly fair, moderate or good. Irish Sea, variable 2 to 4, becoming southwesterly 3 to 5 in north and west, mainly fair, good, occasionally poor. Southeast Shannon, variable 2 to 4, fair, good. Northwest Shannon, southwesterly 4 or 5, occasional drizzle, good, occasionally moderate. Rockall Malin, southwest 4 to 6, occasional rain or drizzle, good, occasionally poor. Hebrides, Bailey, Fair Isle, Faroes. Southwesterly 5 to 7, occasionally 4 except in North Bailey, perhaps gale 8 later in Hebrides and Fair Isle. Rain at times, moderate or good, occasionally poor. And Southeast Iceland, southwesterly 6 to gale 8, squally showers, moderate or good, occasionally poor. And that completes the shipping forecast. Now, with a look at the general weather, here's Ben Rich.
Danielle, thank you. Summer weather has made something of a return. Temperatures today in many places have been up to 23, 24, 25 degrees, and those temperatures have further to climb over the next few days. During this evening and tonight, a mild night in prospect. Any showers that have popped up will tend to fade away. Across England, Wales, Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, we could well see some mist and fog patches developing. The one exception to that story is the north of Scotland. Here we will see thickening cloud and some outbreaks of heavy rain, particularly for the Western Isles, Caithness and Sutherland, and up into the Northern Isles. So for Sunday, I'll start with the forecast for England and Wales. There will be some patches of mist and fog around if you're travelling early in the morning. That mist and fog will tend to lift and clear, and then it's going to be a fine day with long spells of sunshine. There could just be some areas of high cloud in the sky, turning that sunshine a little hazy at times. Now for Northern Ireland, any early mist and fog will clear. There will be some large amounts of cloud at times, but also some sunny spells. Southwest Scotland and eastern Scotland will have a dry, sunny, breezy but very warm day, whereas northern Scotland will continue to see areas of cloud, some occasional bursts of rain, and it will stay quite windy. Temperatures here just 15 to 17 degrees, but elsewhere generally between 20 and 26 Celsius. And as we head through the beginning and the middle part of the coming week, temperatures could hit the high 20s, maybe 30 degrees.
Ben Rich, thank you.
Hello, I'm David Yelland, former editor of The Sun.
Hi, and I'm Simon Lewis. I was Communications Secretary to the late Queen and Director of Communications for Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister.
You're basically spin doctor extraordinaire.
And you were from time to time, David, my tabloid nemesis, I guess.
This is When It Hits the Fan.
Every week we're going to look behind the scenes and try and work out what's really going on when things hit the fan in a crisis.
The difference between what I read in the media about these things and what actually happens and what they care about is huge.
When It Hits the Fan, starting on Wednesday evening at 9 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Mark Forrest. Good evening. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has ordered an investigation into police impartiality in England and Wales, complaining of an unacceptable rise in officers taking sides on political issues. A backlash has prompted the organisers of the Nobel Prize ceremony to withdraw an invitation to the Russian ambassador. The American singer and songwriter Jimmy Buffett, who turned a beach bum anthem into a billion-dollar fortune, has died. The Home Secretary has asked the police watchdog to look into activism and impartiality in forces in England and Wales. Suella Braverman says she wants His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary to examine whether some forces' support for what she called politically contentious matters was having a detrimental impact on policing. But the Police Federation, which represents lower-ranking officers, accused the government of constantly changing the goalposts. Labour said Ms Braverman was letting crime victims down by failing to set out serious policy. Our political correspondent Tony Bonsignori reports.
Intervening in public rows over gender identity, attending marches and parades, taking the knee in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. This is the sort of activity by some police officers that Suella Braverman has long been critical of. Now she's ordered the body which inspects forces to look at how far it affects day-to-day policing, as well as the impact on public confidence. She's also written to chief constables to outline her concerns, saying such activity leaves some forces open to accusations of virtue signalling. Others agree. Donna Jones is the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight.
Police forces across the country have got themselves into a little bit of a muddle over the last few years, with chief constables wanting to show empathy towards minority groups, but some chiefs obviously having a slightly different take on what is an appropriate line. What the Home Secretary has done is created a black and white, what's acceptable and what's not, and tried to remove that grey area so that policing is not in any way becoming political politicised.
It remains unclear, though, what difference this latest intervention will make to policing on the ground. The Police Federation of England and Wales, which represents rank and file officers, is accusing the government of constantly changing the goalposts for its own political ends. One minute they want police officers to be more involved in the communities they serve, the Federation says. The next, they want them to act like robots. And Labour is accusing Suella Braverman of commissioning reports into her own political obsessions, instead of setting out serious practical policies to reduce crime. These kinds of debates are likely to figure heavily in the run-up to the next general election, which is expected next year. Suella Braverman has asked for the report's findings by the end of March.
A senior MP says eye-watering sums of public money are being spent on managing the risks of crumbling concrete in hospitals. Labour's Dame Meg Hillier, who chairs the Public Accounts Committee, says the NHS is having to work around the problem posed by the lightweight bubbly material known as RAC rather than resolving it. More than 100 school buildings in England were ordered to close this week because they contain the concrete. The full scale of the issue in other public buildings isn't known, as Francis Reid reports.
RAC was used from the 1950s through to the mid-90s, but the problem is there's no exact record of where, and that's causing major issues now, because decades on, this crumbly concrete can be structurally unsound. More than 150 schools in England are impacted, with classrooms in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland also being assessed. Trevor Rushton is from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and says there's concern about how widespread it could be.
We don't really know the scale of the problem. There is no central record, and although individual government departments are being required to keep a log, that's not public information. The products were used over quite a long period of time, and we know that they were used in buildings other than schools, but there are no statistics to be able to identify the extent of their use.
Among the other public buildings, Harrow Crown Court in London will be shut for the foreseeable future, and at least 24 hospitals are also known to have RAC, although within the NHS they largely already know where it's present. Opposition parties say the government must be transparent about what it knows. The Labour MP, Dame Meg Hillier, chairs the Public Accounts Committee. She says money is also being wasted.
They're spending millions on surveys about what's safe and what's not, and millions in mitigation just to keep the buildings safe and open. And so this is a really big challenge, and frankly, any building built with RAC is past its sell-by date and will need to be replaced. So there is a very big bill for the taxpayer.
The government said it had been advising schools to have adequate contingencies in place since 2018, and that it had acted after guidance on RAC changed over the summer.
The organisers of the Nobel Prize ceremony have withdrawn their invitations to the ambassadors of Russia and Belarus after a furious response, particularly from the host nation Sweden, because of the war in Ukraine. Kyiv called it a victory for humanism. The Nobel Foundation said it was also taking Iran off the guest list for the event in Stockholm. Here's Paul Moss.
The idea, supposedly, was to broaden understanding of the various Nobel Prizes and the ideals behind them. But there was an outcry when the ambassadors of Russia, Belarus and Iran were included on the list of invitees for this year's awards ceremony. The Swedish Prime Minister was among those who weighed in, saying it was important to isolate Russia in every way. The Nobel Prize Foundation at first stood its ground, but then seems to have caved into pressure when the King of Sweden said he might not attend the ceremony. However, the Russian, Belarusian and Iranian ambassadors to Norway are still on the guest list for the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, which takes place in the Norwegian capital, Oslo. A spokesman for the Belarusian democratic opposition called on Norway to follow Sweden's lead and cancel the invites. He said the ambassadors were advocates of hatred, anger and war.
Ukraine's security service has named one of the country's richest men as a suspect in a fraud and money laundering investigation. Detectives searched the home of Ihor Kolomoisky, who's the most prominent person to be targeted in the current anti-corruption drive. Our correspondent Paul Adams reports from Kyiv.
Ihor Kolomoisky has been under investigation for some time. Now he's officially named in connection with a fraud and money laundering case, suspected of moving millions of dollars out of the country between 2013 and 2020. It's the latest move by a government which says tackling corruption is one of its highest priorities. And it has personal relevance for President Zelensky. Mr. Kolomoisky owned the TV channel which broadcast the show in which Mr. Zelensky, then a comedian, played the role of a school teacher who unexpectedly becomes president of Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky has always rejected the notion that he's somehow beholden to the oligarch who gave him his break. Not everyone is convinced by today's move. Anti-corruption activists fear that Mr. Zelensky is weakening the power of Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau in favour of the State Security Service, which they praise for its conduct in the war, but see as highly compromised when it comes to the issue of tackling graft.
Rail passengers across England have been facing disruption from a second day of strike action. 20,000 members of the RMT have walked out at 14 train companies in a long-running dispute about pay and jobs. Train drivers in the ASLEF union are back at work after their strike yesterday, but the network has yet to recover. More details from our business correspondent, Mark Ashdown.
The RMT wrote to the rail companies last week, setting out the steps it felt were needed to resolve this dispute. It wants a fresh one-year pay proposal, backdated, and guarantees there will be no compulsory redundancies. Well, last night, the Rail Delivery Group, which represents the operators, responded and agreed there was a need to navigate a way through this long-running dispute. However, it pointed out the crippling financial challenges facing the industry and said it could not afford the kind of pay offer the union demanded. It said negotiators were ready and willing to sit down with union leaders next week to explore options, but wanted strike action suspended first. The union said that was not possible, but that it was also willing to talk.
Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf has joined thousands of supporters on a march for independence in Edinburgh. It was his first appearance at such an event since he replaced Nicola Sturgeon in March. Our Scotland correspondent Jamie McIver sent this report.
Marches by supporters of Scottish independence take place regularly, but this one was more significant than most, with the First Minister Humza Yousaf taking part and lending the event his explicit backing. He's attempting to increase support for independence, with most polls suggesting a majority of Scottish voters are against it or undecided. Mr Yousaf told a rally outside Holyrood that independence could correct what he described as the wrong of Brexit.
Imagine a Scotland that has rejoined the European Union, where our young people once again have the opportunities that generations in the past have had, where they'll be able to work and study and travel abroad, live in the European Union, and of course we'll welcome Europeans to our nation too.
It's unclear how supporters of independence can achieve their aim. Last year, the Supreme Court ruled that the Scottish Parliament could not hold an independence referendum without Westminster's consent. The three main opposition parties at Holyrood, which all oppose independence, say Mr Yousaf should focus instead on day-to-day issues such as health and education.
India has launched its first mission to study the sun, just days after the country made history by landing a spacecraft near the moon's south pole. Large crowds gathered to watch the rocket blast off from the southern state of Andhra Pradesh. The Aditya L1 probe, named after the Hindu sun god, will observe solar winds and solar flares, which can hinder satellite communication. The American singer-songwriter Jimmy Buffett, whose music celebrating carefree living in the sun made him a millionaire many times over, has died at the age of 76. He spent much of his early career busking before a hit in 1977 changed his fortunes forever. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes looks back at his life.
A song about getting drunk on the front porch. Margaritaville, nibbling on sponge cake, pondering over a lost love.
Some people claim that there's a one to blame, but I know
it's nobody's fault. Jimmy Buffett's melancholy lyrics struck a chord. The song about beach life and a guy trying to forget his troubles spent 22 weeks on the American chart and catapulted the singer towards a successful career in business. His tropical rock genre, the theme for restaurants and resorts that celebrated the beach bum lifestyle. Buffett's Hawaiian shirt-wearing fans referred to themselves as parrot heads. There was even a Broadway musical, Escape to Margaritaville. A statement on his website said Jimmy Buffett passed away peacefully. He lived his life like a song till the very last breath.
Sport now, and there have been wins for Manchester City, Tottenham and Nottingham Forest in the Premier League. With the details and the rest of the day's action, here's Rebecca Davis.
Thank you. Yes, firstly, they are approaching half-time in the Premier League's late kick-off as two sides who will enjoy European football this season battle it out at the Amex. Sandy Gillis is watching Brighton versus Newcastle.
With 4 minutes to go to half-time, Brighton lead by 1-0. A hugely entertaining and open game. The goal coming after 27 minutes. Newcastle keeper Pope's poor clearance, eventually creating a chance for Gilmour to launch a fierce shot towards goal. Pope compounded his error by spilling it, and Ferguson turned it in. Joe Linton could almost immediately have equalised, his shot just going past the post. Newcastle have had chances, but Brighton have had the better of this half and lead by 1-0.
Thank you. Elsewhere, plenty of goals in today's other Premier League games, 7 of them coming at Turf Moor. Tottenham beating Burnley 5-2. 5 as well for Manchester City against Fulham in a 5-1 win at the Etihad, while Mauricio Pochettino suffered his first home defeat as Chelsea boss, Nottingham Forest taking all 3 points in a 1-0 win. Brentford's game with Bournemouth and Sheffield United against Everton both finished 2-2. In the Scottish Premiership, St Mirren topped the table tonight after a 1-1 draw at Livingston. Ross County beat Kilmarnock 1-0, while St Johnstone and Dundee drew 2-2. Rangers and Celtic meet tomorrow. On to tennis now, and plenty of British interest in tonight's play at the US Open. Dan Evans is taking on defending champion Carlos Alcaraz in the third round right now, and so far it's going Alcaraz's way. Jack Draper is faring better though. He's taken the first 2 sets against Michael Mmoh. Cameron Norrie gets underway shortly against Matteo Arnaldi, while Katie Boulter takes on Peyton Stearns later this evening. In cricket, England's women have suffered their first ever defeat by Sri Lanka women in the second T20 match. The visitors cruised to an 8-wicket win at Chelmsford to level the series. And Max Verstappen will start second on the grid in tomorrow's Italian Grand Prix. Carlos Sainz took pole for Ferrari in today's qualifying session.
Rebecca Davis. King Charles and Queen Camilla have spent the day at the Braemar Gathering, the most famous Highland Games in Scotland, their first since being crowned. The event was considered a favourite of the late Queen Elizabeth. Our royal correspondent Daniela Ralph reports.
No royal family summer break in Scotland is complete without a visit to the Braemar Highland Gathering. Since 1832, kings and queens have been spectators. It is the first since the death of Queen Elizabeth last September. During her 70-year reign, it was at these Highland Games that Queen Elizabeth was often at her most relaxed. Today, the King and Queen, with the Princess Royal, watch the tug of war, alongside hill racing, Highland flings and the sack race. And the King wore a kilt made from the newly created King Charles III tartan, his show of support for the culture and traditions of Highland dress.
The headlines again. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has ordered an investigation into police impartiality in England and Wales, complaining of an unacceptable rise in officers taking sides in political issues.